The morning light crept softly across the kitchen tiles, touching the rim of Clara Johnson's coffee cup as if trying to wake her from a dream she no longer believed in. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of wind brushing against the curtains. It was a Sunday, the kind of day that once meant slow breakfasts, shared laughter, and long walks in the park. But lately, Sundays in the Johnson household had become a performance, one where Clara played the loyal, cheerful wife, while David played the successful, restless husband who pretended not to see the growing emptiness between them. Clara stood by the stove, her soft curls tied loosely, wearing her favorite pale blue robe that David once said made her look comfortably human. He hadn't complimented her in years, but she remembered every word from the days when he did. The smell of cinnamon pancakes filled the air, sweet and familiar, like a memory she didn't want to let go of. She flipped one over and smiled faintly. It was their wedding breakfast, the same meal she had cooked 15 years ago when they were too young, too hopeful, and too sure that love could survive anything. The coffee machine beeped, pulling her back to the present. She poured a cup for him, one for herself, and carried the tray to the dining room. That's when she heard it. David's voice, sharp and angry, slicing through the quiet. It came from his study, the door half open. At first she thought he was on another work call, but the tone was different, personal, bitter. "I can't do this anymore, man. That fat woman disgusts me. Every time she talks, I want to scream. I don't even know why I married her. Maybe I just felt sorry for her. She's let herself go, completely." The words hit Clara's chest like cold steel. For a second, she thought maybe she had misheard him. Maybe fat woman wasn't about her. Maybe it was about someone else. But then he added, "I swear I can't stand the way she looks at me like I'm still her hero. It makes me sick." She froze. The tray in her hands trembled, the coffee nearly spilling, but she caught it just in time. For a long, breathless moment, she stood there, heart pounding, eyes wide, unable to move. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. The pain was too sudden, too sharp for tears. She heard another voice through the speaker, his friend Michael trying to calm him down, saying something like, "You should be grateful. She's been good to you." David only laughed, a short, cruel laugh that sounded like someone stepping on glass. "Grateful?" he sneered. "She's dead weight. Always has been. I just don't have the guts to end it." Clara slowly set the tray down on the hallway console table. Her fingers felt numb. Her breath came shallow and shaky. But her face, stayed calm. She didn't burst into the room, didn't scream or demand an explanation. She just stood there, quietly absorbing every word like a wound she refused to let bleed in front of anyone. It wasn't the first time David had said hurtful things to her, but this was different. This wasn't frustration. This was contempt. The kind that only comes from years of quiet resentment and emotional decay. In that instant, something inside her, something soft and forgiving, cracked and began to harden. She turned slowly, her bare feet making no sound on the polished wooden floor. The smell of cinnamon pancakes followed her down the hall, like a ghost. In the mirror near the entryway, she caught a glimpse of herself. Her eyes looked dull, her shoulders a little rounded. She had gained some weight in the past few years. Stress, comfort eating, late-night loneliness. But in her reflection, she didn't see what he described. She saw a woman who had given up her dreams to help build his. She saw someone who once laughed easily and danced in the kitchen, now standing still like furniture in her own home. She walked back to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and stared at the 2 plates she had prepared. She remembered how David used to steal bites from her pancakes, teasing her about how she always burned the first one. Now he barely touched what she cooked. He always said he was on a diet or had a meeting. "You should eat less too," he once said casually, not realizing the knife in his tone. Clara picked up her fork, but her appetite was gone. Her mind was replaying his words on a loop. "That fat woman disgusts me." It replayed with each step like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Outside, the world was waking up. The sound of a lawnmower starting, children laughing down the street. But inside, time had frozen. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat there, staring at the steam rising from her coffee, realizing she had reached the moment that every woman in a dying marriage eventually faces. The moment she stops waiting for love to return. After a long silence, she stood up, rinsed her plate, and washed his too. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She knew if she let herself break down now, she might never stop. So she didn't. She wiped the counter, turned off the stove, and carried on as if the morning were perfectly normal. When David finally came out of his study, buttoning his shirt and adjusting his tie, she greeted him with a soft smile. "Breakfast is ready," she said gently. He nodded, barely looking at her, and grabbed his phone. "No time, I'm late," he muttered, brushing past her like she was part of the furniture. The front door slammed. The house fell silent again. Clara exhaled, a long, quiet breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She leaned against the counter, eyes closed, letting the stillness wrap around her. She wanted to scream, to throw every plate against the wall, to ask why. But instead, she whispered to herself, "Okay." It wasn't acceptance. It was a decision. The smallest, quietest decision she had ever made, but the most important one. She would no longer beg to be loved by someone who despised her. And though he didn't know it yet, the moment she acted like she didn't hear anything was the moment she stopped being her husband in her heart. The rest of that Sunday drifted by in slow motion. Clara moved through the house like a ghost who once lived there. Every object whispered a memory. The framed photo from their honeymoon in Italy, the couch where they'd fallen asleep watching old movies, the small crack in the kitchen window David always promised to fix. Each memory felt heavier now, as if the air itself carried the weight of everything unsaid. She folded laundry, watered the plants, and responded to work emails, every action deliberate, mechanical. But beneath that calm rhythm her mind was loud, echoing with the cruel clarity of his words. "That fat woman disgusts me." It replayed with each step like a bell that refused to stop ringing. By evening, the smell of the morning's pancakes had faded, replaced by the sterile scent of lemon cleaner and silence. David hadn't returned home yet. He'd texted once, "At the gym, don't wait up for dinner." Simple, distant, predictable. She stared at the message for a long time before turning the phone face down. The irony wasn't lost on her. He was at the gym, sculpting his body to look successful, while she was here, trying to remember what it felt like to be seen as a person, not a shadow in someone else's life. When darkness settled, she sat by the window with her journal, a habit she had abandoned years ago when David started mocking her for writing like a teenager. The first page she opened still had the list of goals she wrote on their first anniversary. Open my own bakery, travel to Spain, adopt a dog, learn pottery. All unchecked, all replaced by his ambitions. For a moment, she traced the faded ink with her finger and felt a strange warmth, not sadness exactly, but something that resembled awakening. Maybe she had been asleep all these years, believing that love meant shrinking so someone else could shine. That night, she wrote only one sentence. "I heard him." Nothing more, just that. A truth carved quietly into paper. Around midnight, headlights cut across the living room wall. David's car. Clara closed the journal and slipped it into a drawer. He came in smelling of cologne and sweat, humming under his breath. "Hey," he said, glancing at her without pausing. "Still up?" She nodded, just finishing some work. He didn't notice her tone, didn't notice the way she was looking at him, as if she was memorizing every detail. He poured himself a drink, scrolled his phone, laughed softly at something on social media. The sound made her stomach tighten. For the first time, she saw him not as her husband, but as a stranger wearing the face of a man she once loved. The realization didn't make her cry. It made her calm. In a detached way, she thought, so this is what the end feels like. Quiet, almost polite. When he went upstairs, she stayed behind, staring at the half-empty glass he left on the counter. A thought came to her, not of revenge, not yet, but of self-preservation. What would happen if she simply stopped trying? If she stopped cooking his meals, stopped arranging her life around his schedule, stopped pretending to be invisible? The idea scared her, but also thrilled her, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you could fall or fly. The next morning, Clara awoke before sunrise. She didn't make breakfast. Instead, she sat with the notebook and began listing everything she had once loved. Baking, books. Monday morning arrived with a rare stillness. For the first time in years, Clara didn't rush. No scrambling eggs, no coffee brewing, no ironing David's shirts. The sun stretched lazily across the kitchen floor, and for once, she let it. She sat by the window, sipping tea from her favorite chipped mug, the one David always told her to throw away because it looks old. The steam curled upward like a small secret, and she smiled. For so long her mornings had been defined by his routines. Now she was creating her own. It wasn't rebellion, it was survival. By mid-morning, she was standing outside that same for-lease storefront, the picture of it still open on her phone. The sign's bold red letters looked brighter in daylight, like an invitation. She took a breath and called the number. A man named George answered, cheerful, kind, probably in his 60s. "Ah, the bakery space. Lovely little corner spot. Need some love, but good bones." Clara smiled at that phrase, good bones. It sounded like something she could relate to. Within an hour, she had an appointment to see it in person the next day. She didn't tell David, not yet. When he came home that evening, he was unusually chatty, talking about some new client, some deal, some colleague's wife who had really let herself go. Clara was quiet, slicing vegetables for dinner. "You know, some women just stop trying after marriage," he said casually. "It's sad, really. Like they don't care how they look anymore." She froze mid-slice, her hand gripping the knife. Does he even hear himself? She thought. The urge to scream, to throw the knife, to break something surged inside her. But instead, she simply said, "Maybe they're tired of pretending." He looked up, surprised. "What's that supposed to mean?" She smiled faintly. "Nothing. Just thinking out loud." He shrugged and went back to scrolling his phone. That night, while he showered, she opened her laptop and started sketching logo ideas for her bakery. She hadn't designed anything in years, but her fingers remembered the rhythm. The name came to her effortlessly. Clara's Crumb. Simple, honest, hers. By the time David came out, she had a full mood board of pastel colors, cursive fonts, and rustic decor ideas. "What are you working on?" he asked, glancing at the screen. "Just something for me." He snorted. "You and your hobbies." He turned off the light and went to sleep. Clara watched him for a long time, realizing with an aching clarity that she no longer needed his approval, and maybe never did. The next day, the bakery space was even more perfect in person. The floorboards creaked, the paint was chipped, and dust coated the counters. But she saw beyond it. She saw light streaming through clean windows, shelves of golden pastries, the smell of cinnamon and butter filling the air. George showed her around, telling stories about the previous tenants. A florist, then a bookshop, then nothing for years. "You look like someone who could bring it back to life," he said kindly. Clara smiled, blinking back sudden tears. "I hope so." She signed the preliminary papers that afternoon. When she left, the autumn wind felt gentler, almost celebratory. Meanwhile, David was growing distant in ways Clara hadn't expected. He started coming home later, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. Once she found a lipstick mark on his shirt collar. Pale pink, unfamiliar. She didn't confront him. Not yet. It wasn't because she was afraid, it was because she already knew. The part of her that once would have begged for honesty was gone, replaced by quiet observation. She saw how he avoided eye contact when she asked about his day, how he suddenly guarded his phone, and how he complimented her less and criticized her more. His guilt disguised itself as irritation, and she let him believe she was still blind. Weeks passed. Clara began spending more time at the bakery space, cleaning, painting, restoring. Every evening her clothes smelled of flour and sawdust, her hands rough from work, but her heart felt alive again. One afternoon, an older woman named Mrs. Nguyen from the neighboring tailor shop stopped by with tea and homemade spring rolls. "You opening here?" she asked warmly. "Yes," Clara smiled. "A bakery." Mrs. Nguyen beamed. "Good. This street need more women like you. Strong, brave." The words lingered long after she left. By the time Clara's Crumb officially opened 2 months later, the space had transformed completely. Cream walls, wooden counters, soft yellow lighting. On the first day, a small crowd gathered. Locals, shopkeepers, a few curious passers-by. Clara wore a simple blue dress and an apron embroidered with her bakery's name. When she placed the first tray of croissants in the display case, she felt a rush of pride she hadn't felt in decades. Customers smiled, complimented the smell, took photos. For the first time, people were looking at her, not as the wife of David, but as Clara. David didn't come to the opening. He said he had meetings all day. She didn't wait for him. That evening, when she returned home with flour still on her cheek and exhaustion in her bones, he barely looked up from his phone. "So, how was your little bake sale?" he asked. She didn't correct him. She just said softly, "It was beautiful." He nodded absently, already scrolling again. Clara turned away, realizing she no longer needed him to understand because her life no longer revolved around his validation. And yet, a part of her, the part that had loved him for years, still hoped he might notice the change, might see the woman standing in front of him not as an inconvenience, but as someone reborn. But he didn't. Not yet. That night, as she lay awake beside him, listening to his steady, indifferent breathing, she thought of the bakery lights still glowing in the dark, of the scent of sugar and yeast still clinging to her hair. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt untouchable. She turned her back to him, facing the open window where moonlight spilled across the sheets, and whispered to herself the same words she had written weeks ago. "I'm still here." But this time, it didn't sound like survival. It sounded like power. The success of Clara's Crumb grew faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, locals were calling it the heart of Maple Street. The smell of freshly baked bread and vanilla-glazed muffins had become a morning ritual for the town. Office workers stopped by for croissants, mothers brought their children for cupcakes, even the mayor's wife ordered her birthday cake there. But more than the pastries, people came for Clara. Her warmth, her grace, the way she smiled and asked, "How's your day going?" It made everyone feel seen. What no one knew was that every kind word she offered to others helped heal a small, broken part of herself. One Friday morning, a journalist from the local lifestyle magazine dropped by. "We're doing a feature on women entrepreneurs," she explained, snapping pictures of the golden croissants cooling on the rack. "You've become quite the inspiration." Clara blushed. "I just bake," she said humbly. "You bake hope, the journalist replied with a grin. The article went viral online within days. Photos of Clara in her apron, laughing behind the counter, flooded social media. Comments poured in. "She's glowing. Such strength. I wish I had her courage." David saw the article, of course. He didn't mention it, but that evening his tone shifted. "You really let them take that photo of you without makeup?" he said, half laughing, half sneering. "Not exactly your best angle." For a split second, the old Clara, the one who would have apologized, changed the subject, tried to please, almost surfaced. But instead, she met his eyes. "It's not my best angle," she said calmly. "It's my real one." He blinked, thrown off by the confidence in her voice, then scoffed. "Whatever makes you happy, I guess." That weekend, he told her he was flying out for a conference in Chicago. She didn't ask questions. But that night, as she tidied the living room, she noticed his suitcase slightly open, a faint pink scarf peeking out from under his shirts, a color she'd never wear. Her stomach tightened, but no tears came. She simply closed the suitcase, zipped it shut, and whispered, "Go ahead." 2 days later, her bakery hosted its first charity event, Cookies for Change, raising funds for a local women's shelter. The turnout was overwhelming. Even the local news came to film the story. Cameras caught Clara handing over a check, surrounded by volunteers, her face glowing with quiet pride. That evening, when she watched the replay on TV, she didn't even recognize herself. The timid woman who autumn melted into early winter, painting the streets in shades of rust and gold. Clara's crumb had become a daily ritual for the town, a cozy refuge from the cold. Every morning, people lined up before sunrise, drawn by the smell of cinnamon rolls and the soft jazz that played through the windows. Inside, Clara moved gracefully, flour dusting her hands like snowflakes, her laughter echoing softly against the hum of conversation. To anyone watching, she seems completely healed. But inside, her heart still carried the echo of that one cruel sentence. "That fat woman disgusts me." It didn't sting anymore, but it hadn't vanished either. It lived in her like an old scar, not painful, just proof she had survived. One morning, she was restocking shelves when Mrs. Minnan rushed in, phone in hand. "Clara, have you seen this?" she asked breathlessly. On the screen was a local gossip page, Mapletown Buzz. There in bold letters was the headline, "Financial advisor David Hale spotted at hotel with mystery woman." Clara stared at it for a long moment, her heartbeat steady, unshaken. The photo beneath was grainy but clear enough. David, standing too close to the woman with the pink scarf. Mrs. Minnan looked worried. "I'm sorry, dear. I didn't mean to." Clara smiled faintly. "It's all right." She set down the tray she was holding and quietly locked herself in the back office. She didn't cry, not this time. Instead, she sat by the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. It wasn't shock she felt. It was confirmation. So it's true, she thought, a strange calm settling over her. For years, she had lived inside David's world, one built on appearances, control, and shallow charm. Now he was the one unraveling in public. The universe had an odd way of restoring balance, she realized. Slowly, she opened her laptop and drafted a short message to her accountant. "Please transfer the remaining joint funds to my personal business account. I will handle the rest." No anger, no revenge. Just closure and motion. By evening, her bakery was full again. Customers, unaware of the quiet storm swirling inside her chest. She smiled, served pastries, and laughed with the children. Each act a silent declaration that her joy no longer depended on him. Across town, David was having a very different evening. His phone buzzed nonstop, clients canceling meetings, his boss demanding explanations, his mother calling repeatedly. He ignored them all, sitting alone in a hotel lobby with a drink he didn't even want. The woman with the pink scarf had already left, texting, "This isn't worth the drama." He stared at the message, realizing for the first time that the world he built on deception was as fragile as glass. 2 days later, Clara's story took another unexpected turn. The same journalist who had featured her bakery called again, this time with an invitation. "We're hosting an event for women business leaders next month," she said excitedly. "We'd love for you to be our keynote speaker. You've inspired so many people, Clara. Your journey matters." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. Her? A keynote speaker? The woman who once hid behind a man's shadow? "I'd be honored," she finally whispered. That night, she stood behind her mirror, practicing her speech. Sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it's the quiet act of standing up again after being broken. The words felt right, not rehearsed, but lived. Meanwhile, David's professional world was collapsing. The affair wasn't just a scandal, it exposed financial inconsistencies in his firm. His name became toxic overnight. The colleagues who once flattered him now avoided eye contact. Even his mother, Evelyn, called to say coldly, "You've embarrassed this family." He tried to call Clara, but she didn't answer. He left messages, long, rambling apologies that mixed guilt with desperation. "Clara, please, I made mistakes. Let's talk. You're the only person who ever really understood me." She listened to one of them once, her heart heavy but unmoved. "You only understand love when it's gone," she murmured before deleting it. When the day of her speech arrived, the auditorium was filled with more people than she'd ever imagined. Cameras flashed as she walked onto the stage in a simple navy dress, elegant, confident, radiant. The audience fell silent. "There was a time," she began, "when I thought my worth depended on how someone else saw me, when a cruel word could shatter my entire day. But pain has a strange way of becoming your teacher." Her voice didn't tremble. She spoke of rebuilding, of finding peace through purpose, of rediscovering joy in the simplest acts, baking bread, sharing kindness, forgiving silently. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. She bowed her head, tears finally spilling, not of sadness, but of release. Back in the shadows of the auditorium, David was there. He had slipped in quietly, uninvited, watching her from the last row. The sight of her commanding the room, confident, adored, alive, left him breathless. He realized that the woman he had dismissed, mocked, and wounded had become someone extraordinary because of what she had endured, not despite it. For the first time, he felt genuine remorse, a hollow ache in his chest that no apology could fix. He clapped softly, unnoticed, as she smiled under the lights. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Clara walked outside into the crisp winter air, clutching a bouquet someone had handed her. Snowflakes drifted around her like blessings. A familiar voice called her name, soft, uncertain. She turned. It was David, his eyes red, his posture broken. "Clara," he began, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I was cruel, blind, stupid." She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had once defined her entire world now looked small, lost. "I know," she said gently. "I forgive you." His lips parted in disbelief. "Does that mean—" "No," she interrupted softly. "It means I'm free." And then she turned away, stepping into the snow, her figure glowing beneath the streetlights, not as a victim, but as a woman reborn. The snow didn't stop for 3 days after that night, soft, endless, and strangely peaceful. For Clara, the world seemed quieter now, not because there was no noise, but because she had finally learned to listen to herself. Her bakery glowed like a lantern in the cold, each morning filled with laughter, music,
and the comforting scent of freshly baked bread. Her customers adored her, not just for her pastries, but for the warmth she carried. "You've got light in your eyes again," Mrs. Menon said one morning, handing her a cup of tea. Clara smiled. "I think I finally see the world for what it is," she replied, her voice calm. But across town, David's world was unraveling thread by thread. His company suspended him pending investigation, his reputation in tatters. The woman with the pink scarf, gone without a trace. His phone barely rang anymore, except for debt collectors and reporters. Even his mother, Evelyn, had grown distant, embarrassed to be associated with his scandal. He sat alone in his office, staring at the bare walls. The confidence that once made him magnetic was now a memory. He tried to tell himself it was temporary, that he'd rebuild, that he'd win Clara back. But deep down, he knew some bridges don't burn accidentally. They burn because you lit the match yourself. One evening, driven by a mix of guilt and desperation, he walked past Clara's crumb. It was closing time. Through the window, he saw her wiping down the counter, laughing with her assistant. Her hair was tied loosely, flour dusted her apron, and there was that same peaceful glow he remembered from their early days, before he learned how to break her spirit. For a moment, he imagined walking in, falling to his knees, begging her forgiveness again. But then he saw something that stopped him. Clara hugged a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, who brought her a drawing that said, "My favorite baker." The love and laughter in that moment felt like a wall he could never climb again. He turned away, realizing he no longer belonged anywhere near her light. As the weeks passed, Clara's story spread beyond their small town. The video of her speech from the women's conference went viral. Emails flooded her inbox from women across the country thanking her for her words. "You reminded me that it's never too late to start again. I left my abusive marriage after watching your talk. You gave me courage." She read each one with tears in her eyes. It wasn't fame she wanted. It was connection, the reminder that her pain had a purpose. She began hosting small workshops at the bakery every Sunday, Baking for the Soul, where women came to bake, talk, and heal. Flour, laughter, and shared stories fill the air. It was therapy, disguised as pastries.
The first spring after their final goodbye felt like rebirth, not just for the town, but for Clara herself. The sun seemed warmer, the air smelled sweeter, and even the little chime on Clara's crumb door sounded happier. The bakery had become the heart of the community, a place where people didn't just come for pastries, but for comfort, connection, and courage. Every morning, Clara arrived before dawn, her hands dusted with flour and her hair pulled into a messy bun, humming softly as she prepared her dough. The same hands that once trembled from anxiety now created magic with quiet confidence. She no longer hid from the world. She faced it, soft, strong, and sure. Soon, a local magazine featured her story under the headline, "From Broken to Bold: How a Small-Town Baker Redefined Strength." The article went viral again, and one morning Clara received an invitation that made her heart skip. The National Women's Summit, held in the city. They wanted her as a keynote speaker. She read the email twice, her hands shaking, not from fear, but disbelief. Once she couldn't speak a full sentence without her voice cracking. Now people wanted to hear her words. "Maybe the universe has a sense of humor," she said to Mrs. Nguyen, who chuckled. "Or maybe it rewards the ones who never stop walking." The day of the summit arrived under a soft drizzle. Clara stood backstage in a pale cream dress, simple yet elegant, her hair cascading naturally over her shoulders. Her heart thumped like it used to before her wedding day, except this time it wasn't fear of disappointing someone else. It was excitement for becoming everything she once believed she couldn't be. When she stepped on the stage, the audience rose in applause. The lights blinded her for a second, but she took a deep breath and began. "I was once told," she said, voice steady, "that I disgusted the person I loved the most. And for a long time I believed that.
I thought my worth depended on someone else's eyes, but healing taught me something different. You don't need to change to be loved. You need to love yourself enough to stop accepting anything less. The room was silent, except for the occasional sniffle. Her words weren't loud, but they carried truth, the kind that settles deep in the soul. When she finished, the applause thundered through the hall. She felt her knees tremble, but this time it was from pride. After her speech, reporters and attendees crowded around her, asking for interviews, collaborations, advice. But the most meaningful encounter was quiet. An older woman approached her, tears brimming. My husband used to say the same words to me. I thought I'd never escape them. You helped me believe I still can. Clara hugged her, feeling the kind of fulfillment no fame could ever bring. That night, as she returned home, she sat by her bakery window, watching raindrops race down the glass. She thought about her journey, the insults, the loneliness, the fear, the rediscovery, and smiled softly. It was all worth it, she murmured. Across the city, David watched her speech online. He hadn't meant to. It popped up in his feed, trending under #ClaraMills. For a long time, he just stared at the thumbnail, her face glowing under stage lights. Part of him wanted to look away, but something deeper compelled him to press play. As her voice filled the room, something inside him cracked open. She wasn't angry, she wasn't vengeful, she was radiant, healed. And the knowledge that she had found joy beyond him was both devastating and freeing. When she said the words, "I thought my worth depended on someone else's eyes," he buried his face in his hands. The memory of that night, his cruel words, echoed louder than ever. That fat woman disgusts me. He could never erase them, but maybe, just maybe, he could live the rest of his life trying to unlearn the man who said them. David began volunteering at a local shelter, helping recovering addicts and single fathers. It wasn't redemption, exactly. He didn't believe he deserved that, but it was something. He started therapy, facing the broken patterns he had hidden behind arrogance. The first time he admitted, "I was emotionally abusive," his therapist just nodded and said, "Acknowledgement is the beginning of change." He spent months peeling away the layers of pride, guilt, and pain. The man who once judged others by appearance was now learning to see beyond his own reflection. Slowly, quietly, he became someone softer. One summer afternoon, Clara received a letter, handwritten, no sender's name, but the neat, familiar handwriting gave it away. Clara, you once said you wished me peace. I think I'm starting to understand what that means. I've stopped trying to undo the past. Instead, I'm learning from it. Every time I help someone who feels small, I think of you and the kindness you still managed to show me when I didn't deserve it. I hope the world keeps giving you the beauty you always gave it. ... D. She read it twice, her heart heavy but calm. She didn't cry. Instead, she placed the letter in a small wooden box labeled Lessons, alongside her wedding ring and the key to their old house. Relics of a past life, not symbols of pain, but of growth. As the years passed, Clara's bakery expanded to 2 more towns. She published a small memoir titled Kneading Through the Storm, blending recipes with life lessons. It became a quiet bestseller, not for its glamour, but for its honesty. She was invited to TV shows, podcasts, even morning news interviews. But fame never changed her. Each night, she still closed the bakery herself, wiped the counters, and whispered a thank you into the silence. She knew success meant nothing if you forgot who you were baking for, yourself and those who needed hope. And in the background of it all, somewhere across town, David lived a quieter life. No headlines, no spotlight, just the daily rhythm of a man trying to do a little more good than he did harm. He kept one photo on his kitchen counter, Clara standing outside her bakery, smiling under the first snowfall. It wasn't love anymore. It was reverence, a reminder of the woman who taught him that true beauty isn't in perfection, but in perseverance. The autumn breeze carried the scent of cinnamon and baked apples through Clara's crumb. It was the bakery's 5th anniversary, and the line stretched out the door, filled with laughter, chatter, and camera flashes. The once shy woman who used to hide behind counter displays now greeted everyone with a radiant warmth. She'd hired a small team, most of them women who'd been through their own storms, single mothers, widows, and women rebuilding after heartbreak. Clara liked to say, "We don't just bake bread here, we rise together." And the sign above the counter said just that. Among her staff was Lena, a 22-year-old college dropout with anxious eyes and a soft voice. She had come in one rainy morning, soaked, shivering, asking if there was any work she could do. Clara didn't ask questions. She simply handed her an apron. Weeks later, Lena told her story. She had escaped an abusive relationship and had nowhere to go. Clara listened, her heart tightening. The reflection was unmistakable, a younger, more frightened version of herself. From that day forward, Clara became both mentor and guardian to the girl. "You're not broken," she told her gently one night as they cleaned the kitchen. "You're just bruised, and bruises heal if you stop hiding them." Lena soon found her footing, blooming with quiet strength. She learned to bake, to smile, to dream again. One afternoon, she surprised Clara by designing a new pastry, a cinnamon cream bun she named the Phoenix Roll. The symbolism wasn't lost on Clara. "Because it rises again after being burned," Lena said with a proud grin. That pastry soon became the bakery's signature, and a metaphor for every woman who walked through its doors. Meanwhile, the world kept noticing Clara's story. A publishing house approached her to turn her memoir into a movie adaptation. Clara hesitated at first. "My life isn't a movie," she laughed. But her editor said, "Maybe not, but your courage could help people believe their own story can have a better ending." Eventually, she agreed, as long as it stayed authentic. No glamour, no over-dramatization, just truth. When the film premiered at a small festival the following year, it received a standing ovation. Audiences wept, not for her pain, but for her resilience. That same week, David watched the movie alone in a modest apartment miles away. His life had changed, smaller, quieter, but not empty. He worked part-time with the youth counseling center, helping boys learn empathy and emotional control. Sometimes when they asked him why he cared so much about teaching men to be kind, he would smile sadly and say, "Because I once forgot how." Watching Clara's story unfold on screen felt like walking through a memory he could never undo. The actor playing him said those vile words, "That fat woman disgusts me," and David winced so hard his hand shook. He paused the screen, staring at the tearful expression of movie Clara, and whispered, "I'm sorry." After the credits rolled, he sat in silence. The phone buzzed beside him, a reminder from his therapist. "Forgive yourself the way you wish others had forgiven you." He exhaled shakily. "I'm trying," he murmured. For the first time, he didn't just feel guilt. He felt sorrow laced with humility. He wasn't the villain anymore, nor the victim. Just a man learning to live with consequences and compassion. Weeks later, fate intervened in an unexpected way. The local council was organizing a community healing fair, an event uniting charities, shelters, and small...
Another year passed, gentle and golden, like sunlight filtered through warm glass. Clara's Crumb was now more than a bakery. It was a sanctuary of stories. The walls were covered with thank you letters, drawings from children, and notes from women who'd found courage because of her. "You gave me back my smile. Your story helped me leave. Because of you, I baked again and believed again." Clara often stood there late at night, fingertips brushing the paper edges, whispering gratitude to the universe. She didn't see fame as an achievement anymore. It was simply proof that healing, when shared, becomes contagious. She spent her mornings teaching young women to bake, her afternoons mentoring at a local women's center, and her evenings writing quietly by candlelight. Her book, Kneading Through the Storm, had been translated into 7 languages. Messages poured in from around the world, from India, Brazil, Kenya, all saying the same thing in different words. Thank you for reminding me I'm enough. Every message felt like a little prayer answered, a soft echo of the love she once begged to receive, now returned 100-fold. Lena, her once timid apprentice, had grown into a confident young woman. She was preparing to open her own bakery branch in a nearby city, and Clara couldn't have been prouder. "You're not losing me," she told her tearfully one evening as they closed up shop. "You're multiplying." Clara laughed and hugged her. "Then go multiply as much as you can, sweetheart." They both laughed, and the moment was sweet. The kind of sweetness that doesn't come from sugar, but from legacy. One early winter morning, as Clara arranged fresh pastries in the display window, the mail carrier handed her a small, weathered envelope. No return address, just her name written in neat cursive, Clara Mills. The handwriting tugged at something deep inside her memory, familiar, yet changed. She took it to her office, sat down, and carefully opened it. Inside was a single page, and as her eyes scanned the first line, her breath caught. It was from David's sister, Rachel Sterling. "Dear Clara, I hope this finds you well. I wasn't sure if I should write, but I felt you deserved to know. My brother passed away last week. It was peaceful. He was volunteering at the shelter when his heart gave out. He spoke of you often in his last years, not with regret, but with gratitude. He said you were the turning point of his life, that he hurt you deeply, but that your grace saved his soul from becoming something worse. Before he died, he asked me to send you this." Clara's hands trembled as she unfolded a smaller note tucked inside. It was from David. The paper was old, creased, written in his unmistakable hand. "Clara, if you're reading this, I've probably run out of time. I don't want sympathy, just truth. You once told me pain can either rot you or reshape you. I think you were right. I try to reshape every day, and though I'll never be the man you deserved, I've tried to be someone the world deserves instead. I hope you know that the day I saw you again at the fair was the first day I felt peace in years. You didn't owe me forgiveness, but your eyes gave it anyway. It was the last gift I ever needed. Thank you for being the lesson my life was built on. David." Tears welled, but they weren't sharp or bitter. They were soft, like the kind that wash away rather than wound. She folded the letters gently, placed them back in their envelope, and held it to her heart. "Rest easy," she whispered. "You finally became who you were meant to be." That night, Clara walked to the riverbank where she often went to think. Snowflakes drifted in the moonlight, landing on her scarf like tiny diamonds. She closed her eyes, hearing the quiet hum of the town, laughter from a nearby cafe, church bells faintly ringing, the rhythm of a life well lived. For the first time in years, she felt whole in every corner of her being, not because she was loved by someone else, but because she had loved herself, fiercely, honestly, and without condition. As she stood there, a soft gust lifted the edge of her coat, and she smiled. "We both healed," she murmured into the night, just in different ways. Then she let the letter fall gently into the river, watching it float away under the moonlight. A goodbye without pain, a closure without words. The next morning, she returned to the bakery early. The sunrise painted the sky in colors of peach and gold, and Lena walked in with 2 coffees. "You look peaceful today," she said. "I am." She turned the open sign on the door and whispered, "Let's make something sweet." That day, every pastry sold out before noon. Customers said the cinnamon rolls tasted warmer, the frosting sweeter, the bread softer. But only Clara knew the secret. It wasn't sugar. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes when forgiveness
finally finds its home.
The years that followed seemed to drift by like pages of a well-worn book, everyone filled with warmth, work, and quiet wonder. Clara's Crumb became more than a business. It became a movement. Every city that opened a branch followed the same principle Clara had built her life on. We rise by helping others rise. The bakery's logo, a simple loaf shaped like a heart, became a silent symbol of second chances. She never marketed herself as a survivor or celebrity. She didn't need to. Her story spoke in the laughter of her workers, the glow of her shop windows, the comfort people felt when they walked in and smelled cinnamon and vanilla. One crisp morning, as Clara wiped flour from her hands, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. When she answered, a polite voice said, "Mrs. Mills? This is Emily Hart from the Global Women's Foundation. You've been selected to receive the Beacon of Change Award for inspiring resilience and empowerment worldwide." For a moment, Clara just stared out the window, heart fluttering. She had never imagined such recognition. She thought of that terrified woman she once was, standing in her kitchen, heartbroken, humiliated, unsure of how to breathe. And now, here she was, chosen not for what she lost, but for what she built from the ashes. The ceremony was held in a grand auditorium in New York City. When Clara walked onto the stage, the audience rose in applause. The host spoke of her journey, the woman who was once broken by cruel words and rebuilt herself with kindness and courage. Her story, he said, reminds us that the greatest revenge is not hate, but healing. Clara's heart thudded as she approached the microphone. She looked out at the crowd, faces from every walk of life, and began to speak. "I was once told," she said softly, "that I was disgusting, that I wasn't worthy of love. I believed it for too long, but pain has a strange way of becoming your teacher if you listen closely. I learned that self-worth doesn't come from someone else's eyes. It comes from surviving yourself, from waking up every day and choosing to live, to forgive, to create beauty where someone tried to leave scars." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "The people who hurt us often teach us how to love ourselves better. And forgiveness," she paused, smiling faintly, "isn't saying you were right. It's saying you no longer control my peace." The hall erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, people stood, and for a moment Clara's eyes shimmered, not from pride, but from gratitude. Somewhere deep inside, she felt David's letter in her pocket, like a small heartbeat of the past, reminding her how far she'd come. After the ceremony, a little girl approached her, no older than 10, holding her mother's hand. The child looked up shyly and said, "Miss Clara, my mom said you're brave." Clara knelt down, smiled, and replied, "You know what bravery really means, sweetheart? It means being kind even when life isn't." The little girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood far more than her years. Clara hugged her, knowing that in that instant, this was her real reward, not trophies or applause, but hearts changed. That night, as she sat in her hotel room overlooking the city lights, she allowed herself to remember everything. The anniversary morning when her husband's cruel laughter shattered her. The night she packed her things and left quietly, holding nothing but dignity. The lonely mornings when she cried while kneading dough and the slow transformation that followed. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. And maybe in a way it was. The old Clara had died, the one who begged to be loved, the one who doubted her worth. What remained was the woman she was always meant to be, strong, calm, luminous. She walked to the balcony, letting the city breeze tousle her hair. The moon hung above, silver and serene. She whispered into the night, "I forgive you, David, and I forgive myself for staying too long, for believing too little, for not seeing sooner that I was already enough." Down below, the city sparkled, millions of lives unfolding at once. Somewhere someone was crying, somewhere else someone was healing. Clara smiled softly, realizing that life would always carry both. The goal was never to escape pain, but to transform it, like flour turning into bread or darkness into dawn. The next morning, she returned home to find Clara's crumb decorated with flowers. Her employees had organized a small celebration, complete with a cake shaped like the Beacon Award. On it, written in frosting, were the words, "To our light, you helped us rise." Clara laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked at their faces, these women, once broken in different ways, now glowing with confidence. She said, "Didn't save you," she told them gently. "You saved yourselves. I just handed you the matches." That evening, when the bakery closed and the streets quieted, Clara walked through the empty shop, touching the wooden counter, the old rolling pin, the framed first dollar on the wall. Everything she had was built from the rubble of heartbreak, and yet it was all beautiful. She realized then that life wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about finding grace inside it, like flour turning into bread or darkness into dawn. And as she stood by the window watching the sunset bleed into gold, she whispered into the night, "If love could destroy me once, then healing rebuilt me twice." 10 years later, the world had changed in ways Clara could never have imagined, but so had she. The bakery chain now stretched across 3 continents, each branch run by women who once thought their lives were over. Some were widows, some survivors, some just lost souls searching for meaning. Clara didn't own them. She guided them, like a quiet river that nourishes everything it touches and keeps flowing. The world began calling her the Flower Angel, a title that made her laugh every time she heard it, because in truth, she had never planned to be anyone's angel. She had simply chosen not to let bitterness win. At 65, Clara's hair had turned silver, like moonlight brushed with wisdom. Her face carried fine lines of laughter and loss, proof that she had lived fully. One spring morning, she sat in her garden, surrounded by marigolds and lilacs, reading letters from women all over the world. "You gave me hope when I had none." Another said, "Your story saved my life." Clara smiled at each line, but her heart remained humble. She knew the truth. The real hero of her story wasn't her strength, but her surrender. The day she stopped fighting to be loved and started loving herself, everything changed. That afternoon, a familiar knock came at her door. She opened it and her breath caught. Standing there was David, older, frailer, but still carrying that same hint of pride in his posture. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, and his eyes had softened, no longer sharp with cruelty, but clouded with regret. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said in a quiet voice, "You look radiant, Clara." She studied him, the man who once broke her, now standing small against the vastness of what she'd become. He sighed, shoulders heavy. "I came to say I'm sorry, not because I think you need to hear it, but because I need to say it before I go." She blinked. "Before you go?" He nodded slowly. "I'm sick. The doctors say it won't be long." For a heartbeat, Clara felt the old ache rise, the ghost of betrayal, the sting of those cruel words that started it all. "That fat woman disgusts me." The memory flashed like lightning, but it no longer burned. It only illuminated how far she had traveled from that storm. She gestured for him to come in. They sat at her kitchen table, the same kind she once wept beside, though this one smelled of freshly baked bread instead of sorrow. David glanced around at the photos on her wall, her bakery openings, her awards, the smiling faces of women she had mentored. His eyes grew misty. "You built an empire out of kindness," he murmured. "I destroyed ours with arrogance." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we both learned something. You learned regret. I learned grace." He swallowed hard. "Do you hate me?" She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head gently. "No, David, I stopped hating you a long time ago. Hate would have kept me tied to you forever. I let go so I could be free." A tear slipped down his cheek. "You were always stronger than me." "No," she replied softly. "I just decided to turn pain into purpose. You could have too." For the next hour they talked, not about the past, but about life, about dreams they once shared, places they never visited, books they both still loved. It was strange how familiar and foreign he felt all at once. When he stood to leave, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small, worn photograph, their wedding picture. On the back, in faded ink, he had written, I finally understand what I broke. After he left, she sat there for a long time, holding the photo. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she simply breathed, deeply, peacefully, because forgiveness, she realized, wasn't an act you performed once, it was a state you lived in. Months later, a letter arrived from a hospice center. David had passed away quietly in his sleep. His last request had been for his ashes to be scattered near the ocean, the same one they had visited on their honeymoon. Clara took a deep breath, packed a small jar of his ashes, and traveled there alone. Standing by the waves, she opened the jar and let the wind carry the dust across the horizon. The sea roared softly, as if acknowledging the closing of an old chapter. Goodbye, David. You were part of my story, but not the end of it. As the sun dipped below the water, painting the sky in orange and gold, Clara smiled through tears. She took off her shoes and walked barefoot along the wet sand. Each step sank lightly, then filled again, just like her heart.